welcome to the latest iteration, the latest chapter in the Empires of Aether world, Aether Duels. Empires of Aether in a collectible card game. I love card games. I've played the heck out of them, collected the heck out of them all from growing up. It's always been a dream of mine to create a card game. But to channel the love that I've, gained for Empires of Aether and to make that into an expansion of what is already a really cool universe, in my opinion, has been a very, very large goal of mine. And so here is the first release, the first prototype coming your way. You can check out the link. Totally free mod available on Tabletop Simulator directly beneath in the description of this video. But let's get into what we are doing here. So the goal of Empires of Aether is not to just, have one game. It's to have a world that people can be invested in, right? To have characters that, are real and tangible. So this card game is another way to do that, right? It's just another, game mode that if card games are your fancy, if strategy games are your fancy, you've got something for you. And we're hoping to, expand upon that eventually at some point too. But it's to capture the things that make Empires of Aether so unique and put that into a card game. And I think we've done it with a really, really cool barracks mechanic in which the cards in your deck, you never have a dead draw. There's always something you can do because your cards in your deck are actually supporting the units you're making your deck revolve around. We have 4 classes of unit: infantry, foot soldiers, archers, cavalry, and of course, the elemental wielders of whatever element you are electing to play on that day. But what everything is going to revolve around is every element is going to have their own unique general. And so, of course, the customization that comes with this is eventually different generals can be available for each element to be selected to have a totally different strategy catered there. And so with every element, you're going to have so many different ways you can play it. Customization is key. No 2 games should ever be alike. That is the recipe that we have instilled here at Aether Studios. We still have a board that is switching every single time. You're not playing on the same terrain, and so your strategy one game might not work in the next game, right? And we still have the lovely tiering up mechanic that I personally haven't seen in any other card game, so I think we're pretty unique there with our barracks that we're rocking and our tiering up where everyone's starting in tier 1. So obviously early game strategies, aggressive strategies are viable in tier 1. And later game strategies are trying to get to tier 2 and tier 3, just like in the normal strategy game. So we have that built in as well. Let's take a look at what the board looks like. Here we are at the oh-so-familiar table. Where, yes, this is not the standard board that you would come to expect in Empires of Aether. No, this is Aether Duels. And as we said before, we've got the 4 original elements here. And yes, all of the cards available to those elements currently are here. However, we are planning on putting in separate mod files for you to access elements individually, so you can take a look at all the cards, make your own decks there, and import them into this file here, which is going to be really, really cool. But this is what we're looking at. As it stands right now, the board, the field you are playing on, is 3 separate lanes. And that is something that I haven't seen in other card games. I've seen, 1 or 2 games where they've got 2 lanes implemented. Elder Scrolls, what's that called? Elder Scrolls Legends? Something like that. It implemented 2 lanes. I thought that was a really, really cool concept whenever I was playing it. This one has 3 lanes. So the strategy that is Empires of Aether, which is managing multiple things at a time, is still in play. You can't commit all of your resources to the middle. You're going to have to worry about the flanks as well. There are bonuses to controlling the different areas of the board, and that is also implemented to your economy. We won't go over all of the rules in this video. We'll save that for another one. But this is what we're looking at. Let's just say we're playing water for today. We're going to take just these cards here, and we're just going to rotate them out. And notice, they're going to end up being pretty nice and clean on our play mats here. Let's get these nice and straightened. Boom. And so you see, you've got a front row and a back row for each lane. So if you're thinking of actual, older time combat where you've got your soldiers, your swordsmen, your pikemen on the front row, you got your archers in the back row, or perhaps civilians you're trying to protect, right? That's the idea here. However, the left lane largely cannot interact with the middle lane, the middle lane largely can't interact with the right lane, and the right lane sure as heck can't interact with the left lane. But of course, there will be cards that you can play to swap units around and get the jump on an opponent or take advantage of an opening that they have left there, right? That's what we're looking at here. And so let's make our opponent fire. Who else but fire versus water, right? Whew. Let me get all these cards rotated. Shaboom. Don't know why that mechanic works, but it does. Works for us here. All right. So I left all these lines of cards out here so you can quickly drag whatever you're working with here. Like I said, one of the things I love about card games is the future aesthetic we're going to be able to put in here where you're going to have your own custom lanes and all that. And I think that's going to be a really, really cool visual to have here. And so this is what our board looks like, right? So we'll just lock all those in place here. And what's cool is your board's not always going to be the same. We have 2 fields and a mountain here. As of right now, in the early iteration of the game, we only have fields and mountains available. Later with other cards and more feedback and more balancing in play, we're going to incorporate the other environments, just as Empires of Aether does. But as it stands right now, you're always going to have 2 of one resource, 1 of the other. 2 of food, 1 of BM, 2 of BM, 1 of food, right? There's always going to be that balancing in play. Because remember, you have to spawn your villagers. You have to manage every aspect of this game. One of the reasons I love card games is because of the aesthetic that comes with it, all the customization, and of course the virtual vehicle for this is so cool for all the adaptation and different looks you can have with a play mat, something like this. We're looking at Earth here today. Earth's the very first element we made for this. We only have the first 4 elements out and about right now on the file that is for totally free to download as a mod on Tabletop Simulator. We've got Earth, Air, Water, Fire, right? And everything has all these named characters because we're writing stories, we're writing lore for all these elements. If you're into that, if you're extra nerdy, we'll put the links for those stories also below in the description of this video. But we're hoping to put some faces to the names here, right? So we've got our playmat, and this is where our barracks mechanic is really revolving around. We haven't even drawn cards out of our deck yet, and yet cards are going to go into these slots here because our deck is meant to support the units that we're going to put out on the board. Are we going to be an infantry-heavy, soldier-focused deck, or are we going to be a cavalry or elemental-based deck? You get to decide that. That's where your support is coming from. And so what we're also having you do is the strategy hasn't gone away. You have to actually get your own resources. Farmers and miners must be deployed on the board in order for you to gather those resources, whether it's a field, a mountain, a lake, a swamp, whatever you got out there, you're going to be able to access those resources, and you have to be able to manage that. So part of the game is keeping and protecting your villagers, right? But outside of that is you can always spawn defensive structures. You can always spawn infantry, archers, cavalry, elemental units. It all depends on what your deck revolves around. So this is where the barracks comes into play. These cards don't go into your deck. If you've got the economy to purchase them, you can purchase them. As we can see, we have a pretty logical, intuitive structure of the card. Got a nice little Game Boy Color vibe going on here. But we've got food costs, we've got building material costs right here, just like the economy of the strategy game. And then you have attack stats, health stats on the right side. So the attack, of course, is for both attacking and defending. What you'll also notice here, as we just took a look at what the board actually looks like, is there's 2 rows to every lane that you're playing in. Some units are only viable in the front row. Some units are only viable in the back row. And they have different uses for that. So archers, the front row is blacked off. So they have to be in the back row in order to be protected in front of them so they can get their shots off. Villagers have to be in the back row so they can be protected. However, your other units can be out and about wherever you want to throw them, right? If you want to double stack those, absolutely. Let's throw them out there. Huh? And you can see the class of units that we have down here as well. Sword is for melee. Bow and arrow for your range units, your standard non-elemental range units. The good old horseshoe for the cavalry units. And then the little flame for your elemental units. So what's cool about this is they're dealing damage in different ways. And we're going to have different cards to boost different damage sources. So melee, you have to get up close and personal. So you're being dealt damage back to you whenever you're attacking. Ranged is cool because it's doing damage from far away. However, they don't get to deal any damage up close. So that means when they're getting rushed, they're getting aggressed upon, they're not dealing any retaliatory damage. Cavalry is cool because they get to attack the turn they are played, and that's unique to them. But elemental units are dealing elemental damage and dealing it from range as well. So your elemental and archer units are doing it from far away, whereas your cavalry and infantry are getting up close and personal. But as you'll see in the very top right, you'll see these little Roman numerals for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We've got all tier 3s on this bottom row and all tier 1s up here. This is where they come into play. Your deck is going to revolve around certain mechanics, certain types of units, and you actually have to invest in upgrading them. Whereas one of the very first things you get to do in the game is to spawn your general, as that is what the centerpiece of your strategy is to level him up and make him stronger, right? Him or her. And you want to preserve him as long as you can, but that's just not always what the opponent's got in mind for you. So when you're tiering up in the game, going from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, your general is going to implicitly get buffs added to their stats, right? The attack's going to go up, the health's going to go up as well, make them a little tankier. You'll notice they have all the symbols here because there's adaptations for them to deal all types of damage, but usually generals are throwing in melee damage here. But you also get enhanced stats when you're upgrading your infantry, or your range, or your elemental, or your cavalry units. Here we've got the foot soldier depicted here with the stats of 1 and 2 in tier 1. But if we upgrade that to tier 2, then it becomes 2 and 2. You get a small attack buff. And if we upgrade them to tier 3, then they become 2-3. But the cost is staying the same. Huh. So what cards are we going to run to support this kind of thing? Well, these are the cards we include in our deck. These are going to be the standard advantage cards that you want to run. And with the deck limit being only 40 cards in your deck, you have to really pick and choose what you're going for. You can't have a deck that wants to involve all 4 different types of units because you will run out of juice very quickly and you won't be able to maximize your potential with that. And so just like in the strategy game, we've got different kinds of cards, whether it's advantage, condition cards, all that jazz, it's in this game as well, and they serve different purposes here. But these are some of the main advantage cards that you're going to see involved in every single deck. And every single element has access to these. Because you need them to upgrade your units. When you start the game, you can traditionally only train foot soldiers. Everyone can only train foot soldiers. So if you want to access the potentially stronger types of units, archers, elemental cavalry, then you have to include these cards here. What's also cool is with different tiers of abilities, you can include different amounts of copies of them. Any tier 1 copy card, you can have 3 copies in your deck. So that's going to increase the likelihood that you draw them. Any tier 2 card, more powerful, you can only have 2 copies in your deck. And any tier 3 ability or a unit, you can only have 1 copy in your deck, meant to be those final punches that you throw in to finish off the opponent. So, that means with all of these being tier 1s, if you want to be a cavalry elemental deck, you probably want 3 copies of each of these in here. And then the foot soldiers that you can start the game off are only meant to buy you some time for you to actually invest into the units that you really, really want to put your resources into. So that's what we're looking at here on how you're actually going to structure your decks. But we also have other supporting casts here. We've got equipment that is a type of card that is going to be used to buff your generals. We've got condition cards, which are cards you have in your hand. Think of them like hand traps if you're familiar with that in other card games, where the moment the condition is met, you get to activate the card from your hand at no cost. Then we have advantage cards that have food and BM costs as well. This card currently depicted does not have any, but you'll notice that it has text that synergizes with how many movers you have in a certain lane. We have mounts for our generals, which what's really cool about them, and their main utility there is your general doesn't take damage until the mount is actually dealt with. So anytime they're dealing an attack to your general, they're dealing an attack to your mount, actually. But then aside from that, you don't want to just spawn these vanilla text pawns from your barracks. The foot soldiers and archers, those get kind of dry kind of quickly. So we have allies that you also have in your deck, but many of these allies synergize with your other units, such as Earth's Age, which upon summoning him, you get to spawn 2 movers to your lane, 2 elemental units for free, right? But he's a tier 2 card, so you have to invest in accelerating to the middle stages of the game in order to get there. Or the Earth Captain, which is going to synergize with your foot soldiers. Or the Brimwell Hunter, which is an archer, but a different type of flavored text, and something you can run several copies of. And also, once again, if you are nerdy like that and have any inclination to read the stories that we're putting out here, there is also some named minor characters that accompany our generals on their journey that bring them to the land of Aether. Eorn is an example of that. Eorn is one of the best friends of Tyr the General, and he is a great companion to take with you into battle, and of course, lends his own abilities in his own special type of way. And every element has these sort of companion units that you can take with that. So that's the overarching structure of what we're looking at here. Let's show you how to put a deck together. And so if we're playing water here, let's drag our whole placemat over here. Shaboom. Look how cool that looks. How nice is that? And this is the whole barracks mechanic. These cards aren't actually in my deck, right? This is the barracks at play. And the very first thing we do at the very beginning of the game is both players elect where to put their general at the very start. And notice that in your barracks, until we get, a fancier way to program this in, instead of having, the card able to shift from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, I'm not at that level yet. What we have is 3 copies of the card. So you're going to start in tier 1, and then you can simply drag the top one off whenever you're done, and leave it with tier 2, tier 3, whatever you end up as. So your general is going to start there, and, turn 1, we're starting with pretty limited resources, so we usually want to invest heavily into that. And so what we're able to do is make copies of any cards in our barracks, right? Invest in our economy. Farmers should go in fields, right? Pretty logical there. Spawn a miner here next to our general named Mardik. And then why don't we spawn a couple of foot soldiers here as well for the protection, right? So something we'll talk about here in the overall rules of the game, but if you're kind of going into the strategy of things, our units largely cannot attack the turn they are played. But, of course, our opponents can be playing as well. Turn 1, we're not attacking anything. As most card games go, you can't attack the very first turn. But let's say that our opponent has already taken their turn, right? What moves can we make at that point? Well, let's say they put up a little bit of resistance to us. I'm just going to drag some units out here. Like so. So, as most card games work, you can either attack what is on the board, or the goal of the game, of course, is to decrease our opponent's HP to 0. Everyone's starting at 50 HP, and if they've got nothing standing in front of you, you can go straight to their face and hit them in the mouth and make them regret their choices in life, right? And the first one to hit 0, of course, loses. And so, what's also cool about the 2-lane or the tri-lane and the double row mechanism here is that I can attack one square, one tile away from where I am residing normally, right? For most melee units. But if there's a pathway for me to go straight back to the face, then I can do that as well. So this foot soldier here, yes, could attack what's right in front of him, or right over here, or he could go around and go straight to the face. So lots of versatility in those mechanics as well. What's also cool is we've got archers. Archers can attack anything that is in their lane. However, if you're sitting behind a defensive fortification, if you're sitting behind any kind of structure, then they can't target you, right? Imagine someone taking cover, taking refuge behind those. And so, now we're getting into the deck building mechanic of this. What's cool that we have currently implemented here is that every element has a sample deck, or 2. With water, I only have 1. All the other elements, I actually have 2 decks built. As you can see in the description, this is an elemental foot soldier cycle deck. If we go over here to Earth, we've got cavalry and archer focus, elemental slow pace deck, right? Lots of different ways to build it. And of course, like we said, we're going to make a separate file for you to access the entire collection that each element has to offer so that you can make your own deck and import those to fight off anyone that wants to do battle with you in this new way of wielding the elements. And if you're asking, where does Aether come into play? Where are the boss monsters? I do have plans to integrate those as changes. As it stands right now, the game has largely been balanced. Cavalry have been a little strong in our tests, and so we just nerfed those, so we'll see how that works. What I'm imagining is that if games go long, right, as, a lot of card games do, that boss monsters and Aether will be the way to kind of finish things off, right? Perhaps the killer of the boss monster gets a bonus that is too difficult to ignore and too difficult to stop, and that Slayer of the Beast will end up the victor, or whoever wields Aether is going to have an incredibly powerful bonus, new abilities to work with, all that jazz. But anyways, in this deck, and of course this one's already pre-made, we can search it, you can have 3 copies of any tier 1 card, 2 copies of any tier 2, 1 copy of any tier 3, but you can only have 40 cards in your deck. That's what you're working with here. Those are the choices you have to make, and that's one of the reasons why I love card games. There's so many cool cards to use, but what is going to get the most bang for your buck in whatever situation you're going for? And how is it going to synergize with the passives of your general? As you see, the general is going to be one of your main mechanisms for drawing extra cards. Marduk, for example, synergizes really well with having villagers around him. But if we go over here to Fire, Fire is the precise opposite. Fire wants to have military units all around him. Those barracks units or allies spawn for him. So that is what you are really, really weighing on. Hopefully out of the first 4 elements you find something that tickles your fancy. As it stands right now, there's only one general available for each element. And of course, an incredibly dramatic, arduous story behind each of them. And this is the latest addition to the Empires of Aether world. Welcome to Aether Duels.